to what do death doulas do? Starts with a lot of the letter D. I am very excited to have with us Danielle Slupeski and Alex Peters, both death doulas. Alex is in Santa Fe, and you're in Los Lunas, right?
I am.
Yes.
Right. I'm in Albuquerque every day.
Yes, it's just a quick jaunt down the road. So I'm just going to let you guys have at it and tell us what death doulas do. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions in the audience, as well as you folks out there on Zoom. Feel free to pipe up or type a question in the chat. So please, all right. Welcome Danielle and Alex.
Well, hello. Hello. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and start with reading what Jenna has sent to us that she would have done herself, but unfortunately she wasn't able to make it. So, hi everyone. My name is Dr. Jenna Reeves, and I'm a local death doula in private practice, among other roles in the community. I am also a certified grief educator. I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you today. The joys of construction and car accidents on New Mexico highways. My private death doula practice is called Invictus by Jenna Grief and Loss Services. One of the things I realized early on was that there were a lot of ways I could go about this role, and it would be important to make use of my skill, talents, and passions. It's similar to how you might choose a specialization in law or medicine. My areas of focus in my practice are grief support, legacy projects, funeral planning, obituary, and eulogy writing, and community death and grief education. I provide celebrant services for funerals and celebrations of life too. One of my primary services has evolved into grief peer support on both an individual and group basis. This means that you are working with me as someone who has been trained in grief support and has an experienced grief themselves to create a brave space to help your grief feel witnessed. Apologies, first time I'm reading through this in front of everyone. Exactly. So this often includes talking about feelings related to grief, doing activities that help with healing, connecting to resources, sharing stories, creating rituals for remembering loved ones, and learning to live a meaningful life again. It's important to note that the inclusion of the term peer support indicates that myself and others in this role are not a licensed therapist, and it is not a replacement for professional help or mental or medical concerns. This is not something insurance covers, but I understand that it is an important service and charge a reasonable $20 per hour for individuals. I also focus on legacy projects. A legacy project is a creative project that provides a unique opportunity to reflect on life, what has shaped it, and what you'd like to leave behind. This may include, but is not limited to, letters, videos, audio recordings, scrapbooks, and collages to be displayed at funerals. With regard to legacy projects, it spoke to a passion of mine. I think it is important to honor one's life journey through bearing witness and memorialization. I consider it an honor to take this journey with another person. It is a journey that is both profound and vulnerable. I have always been a historian and archivist. I assist folks with funeral planning as well, or what I call a funeral plan. This includes documenting an individual's preferences for their funeral, including burial or cremation preferences, choice of funeral service, and any specific rituals or ceremonies they would like to be included. I help design and personalize their funeral or celebration of life, including readings, music, pallbearers, eulogies, and officiants. I'm sorry again that I couldn't be there, and Danielle and Alex will direct you to my flyers available for at the end. You can reach out to her at Invictus by Jenna at outlook.com. Enjoy the rest of the festival. Do you want to go ahead and jump in now, and I'll take a quick break?
Sure. Oh, that was a lot. Hello, my name is Alex Peters, and I am a death doula out of Santa Fe. I recently became a death doula. I finished my training in November of 2022, so just last year. So this is a brand new field for me. I grew up luckily with a stepfather that was, I guess, kind of mystical in his own way. He had 3 near-death experiences and wrote multiple books about his experiences and had a hospice for veterans. So I was very aware of death, and we weren't shy to talk about it as a family. And then what really propelled me to become a death doula was the death of my grandmother Bonnie, in 2019. And I really wasn't happy with how she went. She wanted to be home, and I wanted her to be surrounded by family, but she really didn't have that choice at that time. So I did some research and I found death doula, which I've never heard of before. Obviously, most of us know the term birthing doula, but it resonated with me more than it did when my stepfather introduced me to hospice in my 20s. So who wants to think about death in their 20s? It's not the coolest thing. So now in my 40s, I'm thinking about it, and it's more of a reality to me. So I jumped into training and it fit me like a glove. I love it. And I was lucky enough to be able to bring in my shamanic practitioner work into it. So my main work is as a shamanic practitioner. So I help people on the soul level, on the spiritual level. So I brought that and moved that into my work as a death doula. And one of the biggest things I wanted to talk today about was ceremony and ritual and how important it is at the end of our lives. And most of us don't think of it. A lot of us don't think of it because we're so emotional and just in the turmoil of the everyday stuff and planning and making sure everything's legal going through. And it's just emotionally draining. It's very hard, but it's so important to create a sacred space for the person that is transitioning. And in my death doula training with Marie Ann Kepler, her concept was called death nesting, where you create a nest of sorts. Again, pretty much if you do have a home, if they're lucky enough to be at home, in the home for this person that is transitioning. Think of like a nursery when you bring home a baby. You make it all special, cozy, bright, happy, calm, peaceful. You're going to do that for your loved one. So if you can have a room that's bright, but not too bright, maybe a view of nature, you're going to create a sacred space, because dying is a ceremony in itself. It's the biggest ceremony we're ever going to go through in our lives. So you're going to create this sacred space. You're going to clean the room. You're going to declutter it, sweep it, dust it, open the windows. Another important thing that you might want to bring in shamanically is to clear or cleanse or smudge, whatever word you want to bring, the perimeter of the home, because we're going to make like a protective shell around this. This is, the home becomes a sanctuary for this person transitioning. So you can take your sages, black sage, white sage, cedar, Palo Santo, any herb that you really resonate with. There's mugwort, and cleanse the outside of the perimeter of the house. You're sealing it in. You're calling in and making an intention. And the intention could be as easy as, may this sacred space of transition be safe, pure, and filled with divine love. So state your intention, what you want for the sacred space that you're creating for your loved one. Okay. Next, you might want to put a bowl of rosemary by your door, because energetically, rosemary is linked to protection. We want to keep this as pure and as protected as possible. So once you've done that, you've cleaned the room, you've smudged around the perimeter of the house, you want to think about sounds and smells for the person that is transitioning. What smells do they like? Usually you want soft smells. You don't want anything too strong. So you don't want to be like burning the sage in the corner of the room. Think of lavender on the sheets, maybe lilacs, vanilla. Think of like cookies, how we get comforted by the smell of cookies cooking in the oven. So bring smells in, and sounds, soft sounds like the sound of a fountain or soft music, bird calls, just whatever you can to create this sacred space. Because this is the space where they're going to take their last inhale and exhale in this world. So that is very, very important. It's also important to open the windows if you can. If it's not the middle of winter, open the windows, get that stagnant air moving. It's going to bring in fresh energy. And some people believe when the soul is leaving and they're ready to exit their body, open the window so they can go out. Some cultures actually believe that. So it might be a good idea just to get that little extra, help there at the end. Let's see. So what's really important is just holding a healing presence. In holding a healing presence, you may not even really do anything. It's just being present. It's just being there. Okay? You don't even have to talk sometimes to be that healing presence. You're anchoring, you're grounding the situation. So that is really important, to keep that space of healing presence when you're in this sacred, it's a sacred environment. It's a sacred space. And I found that it might be helpful for the family to actually create an altar or a mesa. A mesa is just another word for like tabletop. An altar that you can put outside their room with pictures of them, a candle lit, maybe some personal items, some crystals, some symbols, ancestors, just to create an anchoring point that you can go to. And if you do pray, you can pray there. You can give your woes to the altar. You can ask for guidance. It is just a beautiful anchoring point in the house that you can have to go to every day. And after the person does, leave this beautiful, beautiful planet, it's important to keep them in your thoughts and your prayers. Many cultures believe that a soul can be kind of in between for like 7 weeks in the Bardo, in certain like Buddhist traditions. They're from between the life that they left to wherever they may be going, there's this in between. And some say it can be 7 weeks, 49 days, some say 40, and to just light a candle, have that ritual of lighting a candle every day. And just, you don't have to pray if you don't, but just say, hello, I love you. You can do it in the morning, you can do it in the evening. It's just that simple recognition that they are still in your heart and that you love them and you wish them the best on their journey ahead, on this next adventure, this next chapter that we have no idea what it is yet, but I think it's going to be pretty fun. So the personal altar, and then it's really, really important to understand that it's not a goodbye forever. I just found out that goodbye actually comes from may God be with ye. Goodbye. So we're actually giving a blessing to people when we say goodbye. We're blessing each other. So it kind of gives you a little more, like, I don't know, you feel a little more better about it. Like, I'm blessing your journey. Goodbye. May God be with ye. So just remember, we'll all be back together again. It is a beautiful experience. It is scary. It is uncertain. But if you can create that sanctuary, if you can create that sacred space, it's going to help you and it's going to help the person transitioning. And it is a ceremony. It is a ritual. And I know we get caught up in all the other emotions and all the other details of life. But if you can try to create that, it's going to be such a different experience. So I just wanted to share that little bit. If you can create that remember, death nesting. It's a little nest. Yes.
Oh, I can miss the first 45 days. Can I still do it? Like,
Oh, you can do it whenever. Oh, you can do it whenever. There's no rules. There's no rules.
Yeah, because I'm looking for a place. My good friend's daughter just tried to do it 2 months ago, and it's just we're all like just lost.
Of course.
She can barely talk. I mean, I hardly see her. But I've been looking for a rock. Their daughter gave me this 2 paths. I just picked the best place in my garden, but I haven't found it.
Well, you will. It will come to you. So just be patient with that. There is no time limit. It's what is,
I know,
you know, it's perfect time.
Yeah, I haven't.
Well, it's coming. Watch for signs and omens. Always watch for signs and omens. Yes.
Could you tell us more about your training?
Yes, yes. I did my training with Death Village Citizen out of Vermont. It is by Marie Ann Kepler. She has a book out. She self-published it, Death Nesting, in 2019. It just got picked up by Inner Traditions, and now it's like she's with a big publisher. So it's a great program. She teaches herself, and then she has guest speakers. It's usually on Sundays or sometimes during the week. She's changed the format. It's about 11 to 12 weeks long, and you go into ancestral work. You go into dealing with your own death and your own mortality. So it's a beautiful program. It's really, really beautiful. And you do get kind of a little bit of shamanic aspect on life and death with that program. Yes.
Can you do it online?
Yes, it's all online. You do not have to go to Vermont for that. Yeah,
Right,
it's,
that's the easiest.
when I paid for the class, it was about $600, which was fair.
What was the name of it?
Death Village, Village Death Care Citizen. And her name is Marie Ann Keppel. So it is a beautiful program.
I like your saying, look for signs and symbols, because they do show up.
Yes, they do, when you least expect it. So keep that eye out, because you never know when your loved one's trying to speak to you, you know, from beyond. You just keep an eye out, because they will. Sometimes it may take a little while. Like my grandmother passed away in July, and she was 95, and we're still waiting to get the sign from her. We have she's busy off zooming around the universe right now, but I send us a sign, Grandma, because she was so afraid of death.
Oh,
She was very afraid. She had dementia at the end, and but she was out of there when we walked in the room right before she passed, and like there was no sign of her. She was gone. So happy about that. So yeah, keep an eye out. Right. Yes.
Are you busy? Is there a lot of calls?
This is not a full-time job for me at all. You know, I think it's just catching on. You know, I think in another 5 years, I think it will be a very different story, you know, but it's really about getting yourself out there, explaining what you're doing, who you are, and how it will be a great service to them. But, yeah, it's slow. I'm slowly getting there. I think weaving in my shamanic work and the other stuff that I'm doing as I'm becoming an ordained chaplain and stuff. So I'm just kind of weaving in my specialties, and I think I'll find my niche and I'll get more people eventually. But yeah, it's taking its time. Perfect. I will hand the baton on. Oh, wait, one more. Yes.
Do you work with people after maybe they lost someone really close, but they didn't process anything?
Oh, of course, grief. Yes, I'm also a grief walker, I call myself. Yes, I help people with grief processing, especially with nature therapy with that. Yes. So definitely, that's a whole other conversation, but yes, definitely. I definitely do help with grieving. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, I caught my breath. I'm better.
Okay, so I am Danielle Slupeski. I'm an end-of-life coach and death doula. Let me just intro to myself quickly. I have a very long, complicated relationship, both personally and professionally, with death. The first big death in my life was my biological father and grandfather were murdered together when I was 11. And then my maternal grandfather died of cancer when I was 16. And I was one of his caretakers primarily. So that was big. And at his death, I was present for it. And not only was I not the least bit afraid when it happened, you know, I didn't know all of the things that can happen to a physical body, you know, the release of bodily fluids and whatnot, but it didn't scare me at all. And my grandmother was in the shower at the time that he died, and I went into the room, sat on the bed waiting for her to come out of the bathroom. And as soon as she opened the door, she looked at me, she goes, I know, I felt him leave. And that just kind of for my little 16-year-old mind and heart. And so death was never really something super scary to me. And then immediately out of high school, I became an EMT. And then I started working as a telemetry technician and unit secretary on a medical surgical floor in a hospital, and worked my way through nursing school that way. And while working on the floor, I was big on people not dying alone. I worked 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. and often family couldn't get there or just weren't available. And so it was very often that I was not at my post where I was supposed to be at the desk. I was holding someone's hand in a room somewhere. But very quickly people learned that that's what I would be doing, and everybody kind of came to appreciate it. And then when I became an emergency and trauma nurse, I obviously saw a lot more death. Lots of traumatic death, lots of very sudden death, lots of people that were not in the least bit planned or prepared at all. Young people, older people, and everything in between. And as a nurse, I didn't have the opportunity to spend adequate and proper time with those people and those families, right? There was always another bed to take care of. And that's even how we thought of it, right? It wasn't a person, it was another bed. And that never sat well with me. I really struggled through all of that. So then fast forward to 2013, I was working as an emergency room nurse, and I was out with a group of friends and broke my leg. Developed a blood clot in that leg. Blood clot went to my lungs. Literally anything and everything that could have gone wrong from there did, including needing dialysis, a doctor perforating my bowels with a medical procedure she never should have done. I went septic. I required multiple bowel resections. I was intubated for weeks at a time, more than once. My blood pressure was too low to sedate me through that. So I was completely alert and oriented while I was intubated. So all of that taught me so much. I also needed to be resuscitated a couple of times. It had near-death experiences in there. All of that taught me several big lessons, right? I'm much more than my physical body. I don't identify with my body anymore now than my car sitting outside. It's the vehicle that gets me around. So with that, nursing didn't make a whole lot of sense anymore, because I just kind of felt like a mechanic at that point, and that wasn't really what I was after. It also taught me surrender of the utmost, to lay back and allow a machine to breathe for you, because if you don't and you fight it, or you buck the vent, we call it, it's painful. It really hurts. And so you have to just kind of lay back and allow. And learning how to coach myself through that is what I think has helped me learn how to coach people at the end of their lives and through terminal anxiety and in moments where they can't breathe either. So immediately following getting out of the hospital, my husband and I moved down to the Virgin Islands, and we lived on St. Croix for 5 years, lived like we were on vacation, and it was fantastic. But I was very much in resistance to all of the lessons that I learned in the near-death experience. I was living like I was on vacation, and I had tried to convince myself that everything I experienced in my near-death time was hallucinations, right? It was because I didn't have enough blood, I didn't have enough oxygen, I was on medications, and not only did those experiences not diminish, they became stronger. And so in 2018, I Googled death coach because I knew I was supposed to come back and help people die, but I didn't know how, and I didn't know that that was a thing. And so I was like, well, I don't want to be a life coach, I want to be a death coach. And so I Googled death coach, and the Conscious Dying Institute came up, and that is where I did my training. So they're up in Boulder, Colorado. It was a 6-month online program. The first 3 months were separated into end of life coaching. They call it a conscious dying coach. And then the last 3 months of that were bedside vigil work and death doula work. So yeah, and I received that certification in July of 22 and officially opened my business, Conscious Crossroads End of Life Services, last September. So as a business, this is new for me. I've been volunteering with hospice for a long time. I've already kind of laid out my relationship with death prior to that. And I also currently volunteer with the Grief Center as a grief support group facilitator, and then also with Bosque Trails Hospice. So that's me. And what I want to focus on today, because I feel very uniquely situated to discuss it, right? I've been a nurse, I've been the patient, I've been a family member and a friend of a longtime patient at other times in my life too. So I want to kind of talk about the medical aspect of all of this. Death doulas are not medical. Right? We don't do anything medical. We don't give medications. We don't do wound care. We don't do medical advice, anything along those lines, but we can help navigate the medical system. Right? If anybody in here has had any experience with it, I think all of us would agree that it's a pretty fractured system. It is not easy to navigate. It is not intuitive. It is not patient or family centered, even at the best of times. And it is all of the resources are stretched really thin, right? Like your nurse maybe being on hospice, you might see your nurse once a week, until the very end. Chaplain maybe once or twice a month. You get a bath aide a couple times a week. All the other care falls on family and friends. There's a lot to be done in all of those other hours of the day. And there's much more to be worked through, as Alex said, than just the medical and legal aspects of dying. Right? There's the mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical, all of it together. So 2 different types of care towards end of life: palliative care and hospice care. They are distinctly different, and it's important to know what the differences are. So the focus for palliative care is decreasing symptoms and extending quality of life for as long as possible. You don't have to be at any specific point in your diagnosis to receive palliative care. So things like cystic fibrosis or a cancer where you can receive even chemotherapy, but we call it palliative chemo because it's just helping you decrease symptoms as opposed to attempting to cure your cancer. The flip side with hospice, you can no longer receive any curative treatments once you're on hospice. So hospice is saying that a doctor states if your disease process was left on its own to take its natural course, we expect you to not live longer than 6 months. Now you can be recertified with that multiple times, but it does require a doctor's certification to continue that.
Where does dementia fall in on that?
It depends on the doctor, depends on the situation, depends on their like a list of criteria and ADLs, their activities of daily living and all of those things. And so once a person kind of scores a certain number, depending on the scale and system that the doctor is using, they can then say, yes, it's time for hospice for this person. So there's a few slippery slope ones like that. So I think each system probably uses there are multiple different scales out there that they'll use for that assessment. Yeah, correct? Okay. With both of them, you're going to receive pain and symptom management, coordination with your healthcare team, With palliative care, it's more likely that you maintain your regular primary care doctor, and that person is still kind of your spoke, and you also see a palliative care team. With hospice, a hospice doctor usually takes over your care, and your primary care doctor is no longer your primary. Along with hospice, you get access to medications and medical supplies. So if you need a bedside commode, a hospital bed, wheelchairs, walkers, things like that, hospice will help provide those things. Hospice is a medical insurance benefit provided by Medicare, Medicaid, and most primary private insurances. It only counts with that 6-month diagnosis though, right? And then it comes with all of these other caveats like losing curative treatment, things like that. Palliative care is a little different. Important to note is that volunteer work is worked into the time budget, if you will, the full-time hours equivalent of work for hospice patients. So by law, a law that was written in 1982 requires that 5% of all hospice care is provided by volunteers. So that puts doulas in an interesting position, right? Some hospices have been fantastic about welcoming us with open arms and wanting to help train volunteers to be doulas and learn all of this extra stuff. And then some other hospices may not feel completely comfortable with this new progressive profession stepping in. There's lots of overlap between what a doula does and what a social worker does, and what a doula does and what a chaplain does, what a doula does and what respite caregivers do. And I hope that by bringing everybody in today, we're educating on what we do and how together we can all reach out and hold each other up and help hold these patients and families up, as opposed to feeling like anybody's stepping on anybody else's toes, because there's more than enough care to be given out there. And this one was really big for me, a fact that I've come across multiple times. Everywhere I've seen from 67% all the way up to 80% of all Medicare costs are spent in the last 90 days of a person's life.
Oh, wow. It's expensive.
Yeah.
To die is expensive.
It's very expensive. And it also indicates that we are often doing procedures and invasive treatments on people that we do not expect to live, because we are too uncomfortable to have the conversation. Because it's too hard for a doctor or a nurse to approach a family member and say, hey, we can do all of this, and it's going to cause this kind of pain and that kind of pain, and all of the risks that can come along with this procedure, and it's probably still not going to work. But that's not usually how we approach it. And so I want everybody to be very aware of that statistic, and that's really important to think about in terms of your own planning and care, right? Because if you, go ahead.
Would it be better the patient or the patient's family went up to the doctor and asked them rather than the doctor having to come to them? Would that be something?
I think it's always a good idea to be your own advocate. Always. And it's always a good idea to be an advocate for your family members and friends. You can always ask questions. You can always ask for another doctor. You know, whether they're available or not is another story, but you can always ask, right? And if you're not happy with the hospice care that you're receiving, you can always switch hospices, right? You're not stuck or beholden to any of these things once you make a decision. And that's important to know, because often people will have kind of hospice horror stories, and it's like, well, you could have switched, you know, but they didn't know, you know. So again, just that's kind of another role that doulas play, is being a community resource, you know, and knowing those things and knowing which hospices are welcoming of doulas and want to bring us into the fold and help their clients and patients as much as possible. We also hold information about, bless you, about body disposition options, you know, mortuaries and funerals and doing events like this and educational pieces and all of that. I'm kind of veering off of the medical thing, sorry. But that's what I do. I have notes and then I don't look at them. I don't know why I do that. It's kind of funny. What else have I not said? Nothing that. So again, coming back to, doulas are not licensed. There is no overarching regulatory body for death doulas at this point, or for birth doulas for that matter. Because of that, we don't accept insurance. We're not reimbursable. that has pros and cons. So it's a challenge because it means that the cost falls on family. But it also means that, again, you don't have to qualify for our services. You can't be denied. Nobody can say, oh, you've had all your doula visits for the year. You know, it doesn't work that way. And I'm not stuck seeing 5 to 10 patients a day and having to do all of that documentation. If I have one client and family that requires all of my attention, I bring in a cot. I spend the night. I hang out, you know, and then come your loved one's birthday or anniversary or their deathversary, I'm calling you and asking you out for coffee. You know, like, let's go do something together. I've had people tell me that family and friends just kind of stop calling around 3 or 4 months. The casserole stops showing up. Nobody's really there. And that's usually right about when I slide in and start kicking in because I recognize that. I didn't have that opportunity as a nurse, you know, and I do now. So it's literally the most humbling and rewarding thing I've ever done. Hands down. So I think I've highlighted this, I hope, hopefully well enough, but why hire a doula, right, if you already have hospice and palliative care? I hope that people bring me in the minute they receive a life-limiting diagnosis. Hopefully even before that, right? The younger and healthier and further death is off in the distance, the better. Because then we can have these conversations and dive into not just the planning, but really big, deep questions. Like, if you knew that you were going to die, what relationships would you focus on? You know, which ones need reconciliation or nurturing? And if you would do that if you knew you were going to die in a few months, well, why aren't you doing it now? You know, and legacy projects, writing letters to loved ones. You know, we never know. Like, I was 30 years old and landed myself in the ICU being resuscitated. Like, I certainly didn't have my plans done. I didn't have any of these things figured out. I've been married for 1.5 years, you know, so we never know. And so sitting down and maybe even going through and writing letters out to your loved ones now. And so if something were to happen to you, they have that. Revisiting it every year, you know, rewriting those every year on your birthday, writing your own obituary every year on your birthday. Yeah, again, I'm bouncing around. So we recommend that, I know I certainly do recommend that all of my clients are enrolled in hospice. Working alongside hospice is fantastic. Getting permission from the families to speak to the hospice care team and vice versa so that we're all on the same page. I think it's a game changer for families, an absolute game changer. Most often the nurse or clinician isn't there at the time of death. They're usually called after someone has died and they will come and pronounce. And then they usually call the mortuary for you and then they leave again. I can be there through the entire vigil time, explaining step by step what's happening, helping coach both family and dying person through the process. Very similar to coaching a woman through labor, right? There's so many similarities between birth and death. And I stayed throughout that vigil time. If it's what the person has requested, I help the family wash your body afterwards and redress you and lay you out to present for family to see you if that's what you requested. I stay until the mortuary comes to pick you up. We do leave-taking ceremonies with people. I had a woman that I worked with in August that died, and her leave-taking was absolutely beautiful. I stood on one side of the porch and her cousin was on the other, and we each had a singing bowl. And we were ringing the singing bowls, and her cousin was doing a Buddhist chant. And they brought her out, and family was lined up, kind of waiting for her, and everybody was holding flowers. And they tucked flowers into her hands so that she looked like she was holding a bouquet on her way out. And everybody got to say their goodbyes and kiss her on the forehead. And then we went inside, and you can take the bed and turn it into an altar or a memorial, exactly like Alex was saying. So now that this piece of medical equipment that just looks bare is now a place for honoring your loved one. You know, we can all kind of stand around and place flowers or photos or whatever we need to and tell stories and stop bringing sacredness and beauty into whatever space we're in, whether that's medical or home or at a facility, doesn't really matter. That's our goal. And I guess that's about it for me. I'm sure I missed something that I wrote in my notes that I didn't really look at. Does anybody have any questions?
Really quick, I know you said you don't accept insurance or whatever, so how much do you charge for your services? Like hourly, is it?
I work on a complete case by case basis with people. I never want money to be the reason somebody doesn't have services. And I also don't believe that exchange always has to be money. Right? So I have someone that I'm working with right now for grief coaching who's a massage therapist. So we time for time.
And you do a lot of volunteering too.
I do.
Okay, I'm trying to figure.
My husband makes the money.
Okay.
Yeah. One of us has to have a real job.
Yeah, this is something like kind of like a side thing to do, mostly if you want to volunteer and do things like that more than.
Eventually, I would love to make it a full-time gig, right? And to make a living wage on it. I am challenged by the fact that I believe it's something that everyone should have access to no matter what. And because of my own experiences, feel a genuine calling to it. Like, I mean, without sounding really cliche or cheesy, but like entering, seminary or becoming a nun or something like that. Like, I almost feel like I don't have a choice, and so it's like, okay, this is what I'm doing now. And so if at some point it turns into something lucrative, great. That's secondary, and so it's, yeah, I'm sure there are some out there making a living doing it. I haven't figured that part out yet.
What is the role, if any, of a doula in assisted suicide?
Can I just talk about the term for just a moment?
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, sorry, I heard a lot of in the room. I can't help it. So we really try to refrain from using assisted suicide or physician assisted suicide or just the term suicide at all with it. And I don't want to pick on you or anything like that, but I just want to highlight why. And number one, it can be really hurtful to family members who someone has chosen that route to conclude their human experience. Two, I believe that suicide is something that happens in secret and in isolation, and we don't find out about it until after the fact. Medical aid in dying is something that happens with a lot of people knowing about it, right? A lot of people have to sign off on it. And most of the time it happens in connection and in community and surrounded by loved ones. So for those reasons, it's very, very different. But the role of a doula in all of that, I have volunteered with a hospice here in town that does a lot of it. And I had a client, a patient, I was volunteering, I don't even know what the right term is at that point, last October, and I only met her 11 days before she ingested. She had ALS, and she couldn't speak at this point. She just had her iPad. And I visited pretty much every day for those 11 days. And we did everything together, from going through all of the photos in her iPad to creating a playlist that she used when she ingested, to her favorite flowers were daffodils, and we couldn't get daffodils in October. So instead of, having some other form of flowers, I went out and I got bulbs, and I put together figure bags for all of the family that was present. And I put together a little poem with a photo and all of that, so that family now has this legacy of her that will, is that me? Sorry. That's not me. No, it's okay. I just want to make sure it wasn't my for the legacy, these bulbs will continue popping up. And so day of, I told them to consider me kind of the event planner, right? There's this event that's going to take place, and I want family to get to be family. So I handled all the background, right? Like the logistical stuff, like I said, the music and the food and the favors, things like that, and education, and facilitating challenging conversations with family members, because not all family members are going to be on board, but at least getting them to the point where they can recognize that this is what their loved one really wants and needs. Even if they can't be on board and all gung-ho about it, most of the time we can get to acceptance. And so it's kind of just filling in all the little gaps wherever they are. End of Life Options New Mexico also has a lot of doulas that volunteer with them. And so they will send a doula out to be with the person throughout ingestion. So yeah, it depends on what the family needs, but most definitely lots of involvement with medical aid in dying. Good question.
So what words do you use? End of life options? Is that what you would?
Physician assisted death,
Okay.
or planned death,
Okay.
or medical aid in dying,
Okay.
or death with dignity.
That's the law, right? It's
Mhm.
medically.
Medical aid in dying. Yeah. Anybody else? Any more questions for Alex?
So Danielle, the lady that you're working with, for those 11 days, how did she seek your services?
I was a volunteer for her,
Okay,
so that was through hospice as a volunteer.
okay, so, I worked in hospice for 22 years, and, this is just my opinion. I feel like since it became a benefit, a medical benefit, that's how I describe it when people say, oh, you're just giving up. Doctors have said that. So it is a benefit and it's somebody's choice. I feel like when hospice came around in the movement, I feel like it also opened the door to grief and bereavement. We always had it, but it was treated in a different way. But I think it opened the door for lots of places, lots of people, grief coaching, you know, have been able to tap into that part of the dying and, you know, and after. But I recently had a friend who lived not very far from me, and I called Danielle up and I said, how does this work? And how much, you know, is your fee? Because she's come and presented at our hospice, but I never asked that, but I wanted to gift that family your services. But on a personal note, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't get you there. I couldn't knock on the door to introduce you, to introduce this concept, this service. I believe in it, but not a lot of people do. You know, and you can't just impose. I knew the family. I knew that, I mean, they might, I don't want to say I knew for sure they would have not wanted it, but most likely not. And I felt like I would be overstepping the boundaries. But, so I feel very bad about that. I have felt bad since she did die, you know, since her death. But I'm just sharing that with everybody here because even though I work with what I work with, I wasn't as a friend, a human being, another person to get your services as a gift for somebody. I just couldn't, I wasn't able to navigate that. So it's gonna be hard. It's a challenge.
Thank you for acknowledging that, right? That even for professionals, it's really hard, right? And we don't want to overstep. Oh, no, just a second. I totally get it. And thank you for A, thinking of it. And B, I think that what I found that has been helpful or worked in the past, like I have a couple of podcast interviews out and I've had people just say, hey, I know you're going through this right now. I've met this woman. Give this a listen if you have a second. And then it puts it on them where now all of a sudden, if they're interested and it sparks something, they'll reach back out and ask you about it. You're like, oh, you know her? You know, and then it's not that, oh, hey, I know your loved one's dying. Here's what you need, right? It never feels good, right? That never feels good for anybody. But seriously, thank you for acknowledging them because I think that's a big thing. Yes.
Something that I love is the etymology of the word doula in Greek means God. Like someone who takes you down a special hiking path or a Sherpa up Mount Everest. And people with, sometimes I'll help deliver a baby in the morning and help somebody pass that night. It's like a revolving door. And you say, well, if you have a midwife, why do you need a doula? The doula is filling the mortar that fills the gaps.
I call myself slime. So yeah. Like slime, and I just like meld into all the cracks and fill it in. But mortar sounds cooler. Yeah, sorry, I did that one day. I spoke at a funeral and then immediately left there and went to a baby shower. And so yeah.
It's translation from both.
Would you be comfortable talking about your near-death experiences?
Sure. So to give the very quick rundown, so at multiple different nights, there were multiple different resuscitation efforts. And so I don't know at what point in 3D reality these events took place. You know, like it all felt simultaneous from my perspective. And there was one night in particular, I had a very large abdominal surgery. At this point, my large intestine was sticking out up here, my small intestine was sticking out up here, and there was an incision in the middle, and they needed to restart the blood thinning medicine for the blood clots, which then made the incision bleed out. So I required a massive transfusion and resuscitation that night. My husband was not at the hospital that night. We were about 6-7 weeks into the hospital stay at this point, and he hadn't gone home, and his brother took him home, and they'd shared a bottle of Jack Daniels, and he was passed out drunk at home. So when my girlfriend was calling repeatedly, like, we need to get back to the hospital, he was not there. So when I passed out, the last thing I remember consciously was looking up at the monitor, and I had an arterial line at the time, and my blood pressure was 46 over question mark.
Oh, wow.
And I remember thinking, I didn't think he would read that low. And that was the last thing I remember consciously. Right? Always nursing. And so at some point, few things. The light, right? Like, I'd always pictured like a flashlight beam or a train light, you know, like a headlight and a tunnel. And it was not that at all for me. It was very much like when you're underwater and you look up and you see where the sun is, but it's diffuse and sparkly around the edges. And it was like that. And I wanted in the light. And it was above me. And it felt like I was drowning only because I didn't have a body. Like, I couldn't push myself up into it. And everything was in that light. Like, our words are just useless almost to try to describe it. And we can say unconditional love, but like, even saying unconditional love is a condition, you know? So like, our brains can't even fathom what this is. And so at some point that happens. And I also found myself in the middle of a thing that felt extremely mechanical. It felt like gears or like an old Kodak slide projector. And I was in the middle of it. And when I say I didn't have a body, and I could see 360, the whole circle all at once. And like a slide projector, each one of these cells is what I call them in my head, what makes sense, was simultaneously a still shot, like a photograph that I could look at, a movie that I could watch third person, and I was in it as myself. These were all scenes from my life, like memories. Not conscious memories, not things that I would have told you I knew about. I mean, things that happened before I was verbal, some of them. But I was also experiencing it from the perspective of everyone else there. So it was like, right now I would know what each one of you are thinking and feeling, like, very distinctly, and I could feel all of it. And so at first it was slow, like I had time with this memory and it would almost click over, and then I would be with the next one, and then and just feeling not only the impact of my words, but of my thoughts and emotions on other people. And it was almost like I had a tiny bit of access to what got people to this moment, you know, all of their life experiences that gave them the perspective they have right now. And I had a little bit of access to what happened to them after this moment. And the way I see it now is almost like a tree, like branches or forks, where every interaction you have with someone is a fork, and you have the potential to send them off in a more positive direction or a more negative direction. Every interaction you have, from even just walking by someone and having a judgmental thought about them, you have sent their energy on like a trajectory one way or another. And so after that and experiencing all of that, I mean, it changed everything for me. I can't even speak to people the way I spoke to people before, because I recognize what it means. And so this thing is spinning, and like I said, at first it was slow and it would kind of move over, and then it just all started to meld together and it started spinning faster and faster. And then it was just like I was experiencing my entire life all at once from like this omniscient place. And it was super clear that the theme was compassion and connection, like over and over and over again. And as it was spinning, it started to create like this suction force, it felt like, where I started to feel like I was being pulled upwards. There was no like ceiling or roof on this contraption, but yet I knew somehow that if I crossed this invisible threshold, that there was no coming back. And so, again, my husband wasn't there that night. And so my thought process was, and I laughed at myself, now my hubris, but I was just like, okay, listen, this is great and I want it, but I'll be right back. Like, I have to go say goodbye. Like that was genuinely what went through my head. Just give me a second. And so as it's spinning, like I thought I went off, like it was a ride of some sort. And I shoved like what should have been my arm, like to jam the gears of this thing. Now, from this world perspective, I've been re-resuscitated and re-intubated again. And it's now 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And my husband's finally gotten to the hospital. And I haven't responded. And he gets there and he's squeezing my hand and yelling in my ear, squeeze my hand. And I squeezed his hand. From my perspective, when I shove my arm through this thing, like we do this cliffhanger moment with our hands. And like by fingernails, he like pulls me through this spinning thing and back into my body. And then I was in there. Yeah. So, but yeah, and that's the very summarized version of what I could put into words. But, yeah.
So what was your life like after that?
So immediately after, the immediate thereafter was still really, really hard. I was still in the hospital for 6 or 7 weeks longer than that, had several more surgeries. I was home for 10 months with what I was left with, again, my large intestine, small intestine, and a big open hole in the middle. Because when this bled out, it forced the incision open. So I had a wound back in the middle. And that was for 10 months at home. They wanted to send me to a nursing home and I refused because I was a nurse and I knew better. Like, I'll get first, I never come out. So my husband became my wound care nurse and did everything at home. And then 10 months later, they put me back together. So what I call my Humpty Dumpty surgery. So now I have short bowel. So like everything moves through rather quickly. But other than that, like there's no reason I should have my own kidneys. There's no reason I should be up and walking. I was told I'd never walk again. I was told so many things. And yeah.
But your mental attitude also changed.
Absolutely. Definitely. The first few years after, I was very, very much in resistance. I had talked to doctors and nurses that were friends of mine who were very much doctors and nurses. You know, it was a hallucination. You know, you were low on oxygen, you're low on blood, and medications, and this and that. And so I tried to deny all of it for about 4 or 5 years. And finally, it was just, I actually told my husband one day, I'm like, babe, I think I'm schizophrenic. I was like, I feel and hear things and like that I never did before. And I genuinely feel like some door has been opened that like I can't close. I don't want to close now. But for a while there, it was just like, I don't even know what's going on anymore. Something's wrong. And then it was like, well, no, you're supposed to be a death coach. Oh, well, okay. And then now all of it makes sense. And now it feels like everything that has happened. I feel like Slumdog Millionaire. Does everybody know that movie?
Yeah.
Where he like wins the trivia thing because all of these life experiences. I continually find myself at the bedside of families where I'm just like, oh, that's why. That's why that happened 20 years ago. That's why I had that one conversation. Just to be able to know what to say and do right now in this moment for these people. And I continually have experiences that are just like, if that was it, if that's the last experience I have, worth it. Done. Good. You know, put it in the win column. So it's the coolest, most rewarding thing I've ever done. Agreed?
Oh, from what I've heard from, yes. I think so.
Would you have any stories you'd like to share?
These stories, I don't have anything exciting that's a near-death experience. I have family members with near-death experiences, but not in person.
Come back up.
Yeah, well, my stepfather, he's written 3 books on his near-death experiences. He was struck by lightning through the telephone line in 1975. And he had a near-death experience for about 28 minutes. He was declared dead. It came through the phone line, nailed his boots to the ground, threw him up in the air, back down. And it took him 2 years to learn how to walk again. He had to wear welding glasses because it ruined his eyes. It definitely ruined his heart. He had to have a valve put in. And he had a near-death experience where he went to the light, but he was greeted by spiritual beings, he called them, in like a crystal city. And he was given, I guess, almost prophecies of things to come, like Chernobyl and some other, like that's the biggest one I can think of, but he was given like these prophecies. They were like on these screens of like these events that were going to come to him. So from that experience, that was his first near-death experience, he was able to start communicating with the dead. He can speak to people that have transitioned from this world. And then he had another near-death experience when he had to have his heart valve replaced. Then he had another near-death experience when he had a brain aneurysm. So he's had these 3 experiences, written 3 books about it. And then my mom's had her own near-death experiences, from drowning as a child to being stung by a bee in her 30s. But she didn't go to the light. She just says, because she had 3 children at the time, she knew she needed to come back. It was very blissful. Once she was out of her body, she really didn't want to leave. She did not want to come back. There was no desire to get back in that body and live her life other than for her children. So that's kind of a comforting thing to know. You do become detached from this vehicle, as we can call it. You know, you do want to leave when it's time to leave, but it wasn't her time to leave. But yeah, I mean, it just proves that there is something greater than us out there, and they lost their fear of death afterwards. There is no fear. So I don't think I need a near-death experience to know that. I can hopefully not experience that myself, but yeah, it's a beautiful thing to know that there is so many similar experiences, to know that something greater than us is out there.
Yes, when you say your stepfather after the second near-death experience, he can talk to the dead, do you mean like ghostly folks, or do you mean like dead?
Dead. I mean, he could talk to anybody, but people that are in spirit.
Like, yeah, and then also.
And then, yeah, either they've transitioned all the way over, or they could be
Okay.
stuck on this earth as a what we call a ghost or whatever. Yes, he can do. Yes.
Are we out of time, or
Almost, but,
just one more question? One more
we
question.
got 2 questions.
Go ahead.
Something you said earlier, reminded me, when you said you didn't want people to die alone. And, out of the 3 close family members that I've had, die, 2 of them have waited until we were out of the room. My father and my sister, and not my mother. But I since then, I was listening to a podcast, you know, of course, it makes you feel terribly guilty, right? You're sitting there all night, and then you go take a walk and you come back and the person has died. And what I've heard that's probably intentional. And I just wondered if you had any comments on that.
I completely agree that it's intentional. And I think that people will go either way with it. I've seen people wait until the last person arrives.
Right,
And
that's what
within
my
a couple
mother
of
did. She
minutes-
waited for me.
Okay, and then the exact opposite. They wait till the last person goes down to just to go grab a cup of coffee at the cafeteria, and then that's when they go. I tend to see that. In fact, I think I've always seen that only happen with family. Right? I think that you guys are the people that matter. Right? It doesn't matter if like I might be a comforting, calm presence to be there with someone, but that's very different than a loved one. You know what I mean? So like if they don't want loved ones to be in the room because they didn't find that to be necessary for their goodbye, I would hope that me being in there isn't intrusive. And it's funny, you can kind of feel the difference sometimes. You can tell when somebody's like, even if they're nonverbal, but they're craving like they're touched somehow, and you could just sit with them and like hand on them. And there are other people where you very much feel that they're good and leave them be in their space. Don't touch them. Don't enter their energetic field even. You just sit on the sidelines. So yeah, it's very individual, but I think you're completely right.
And last question.
Okay, thanks. Alex, can you share with us a particularly touching or spiritual moment with a dying person?
Well, I think the most recent would be personal, from my grandmother passing in July. He passed 2 days after her 95th birthday. And the last few days, the last week of her life, she really became unverbal. She couldn't communicate. She couldn't really string her sentences together. She had Alzheimer's, and she 2 days or a week before she died, she fell, hit her head on the floor, and had to get stitches. And that was her 3rd fall in less than a year with her head. It was a very, very hard year, but she was in and out of consciousness, and me, my mom, and one of my younger sisters were there, and we played songs for her. We read her poetry. We held her hand. We told her how much we loved her. And you could just feel, even though her eyes weren't open and she wasn't communicating, that she was loving it. She was appreciating it. She was preparing to leave. And I think just feeling her presence and knowing that she was going to leave was a very spiritual moment for me, you know, because as much as you know they're gonna leave, you still don't want them to leave. You know, still at 95 years old in her condition, you're like, I want you to go, but I don't want you to go. But in that moment, I felt like we were giving her that permission, like, we love you, take these memories with you, it's okay. And so that was, I didn't want to tear up because it was so fresh, but I feel like we gave her that permission to go because she, like I said, she was terrified. She didn't want to be cremated because she didn't want to be burned. She didn't want to go on the ground because she didn't want to be buried. She never wanted to talk about death. So there was this huge fear. But in the end, it was so peaceful. It wasn't a fight for her. And just being there with her and giving her those stories and playing music from the 40s and 50s, it was such an honor and a privilege to be able to do that. So that was very spiritual for me.